Well, Ilorin is a Yoruba-speaking community. Ilorin is a Yoruba-speaking community comprising of different ethnic people. You have the Yorubas in Ilorin, you have the Hausas in Ilorin, you have the Nupes in Ilorin, which in local parlance they are called Takpa. You have the Kanuris, you have the Beriberis, you have the Kemberis, and so many others. The Fulanis forming Ilorin. So it's not really a straightforward answer that Ilorin is a Yoruba community or Ilorin is not a Yoruba community. Ilorin is a melting pot of different people. And at the beginning, there were 4 distinct settlements in Ilorin. There was the Yoruba community, which was centered around a place called Idiakpe. There was also the Fulani settlement, not too far from Idiakpe. There were also a conglomerate of people called Gambari, and there were people also who were living a little bit distant away from the city center in a place called Okesuna. So these 4 communities together are usually referred to as Ilorin. On the core area called, which is the Yoruba side, was peopled exclusively by Yorubas. The Okesuna side was peopled by a mixture of people, mostly Kanuris. Then there was the Fulani settlement, which was also exclusively Fulani people. The Gambari also was a melting pot, because the word Gambari itself is neither Yoruba, nor Hausa, nor Nupe. In fact, it is a Baruba word. Gambaru, people who speak languages of another area, of other areas, because the core settlement of Gambari was around the Gambari market. Gambari market was an international market where people from all over the north and even as far as North Africa used to trade. The early European visitors to Ilorin wrote quite a lot about the Gambari market as an international market, the earlier explorers. So Gambaru is a Baruba word, meaning languages, people who speak languages from afar. In other words, foreigners. Yeah, the market for foreigners, that's Gambaru. These settlements, as I said, were semi-autonomous. The Yorubas had their own head in Idiakwe. In fact, the founder of that segment of Ilorin was known as Ojo. The compound is still there in Idiakwe. These days it's called Ilealase, but in the front of the house there is a big billboard where they say Ojo Isekuse, who is acclaimed by some people to be the founder of Ilorin, but that is the Yoruba segment of Ilorin. There was the Fulani segment, which had Olufadi, and then there was the Gambari, which had Seriki Gambari as the head, and there was the occasional settlement, which had Sholagberu as the head. So each of them were independent. They were living independently and acting independently. So that was how Ilorin started. Now, in terms of land, I've talked about people. In terms of land, the land on which Ilorin was built was originally a Baruba land. And that Baruba land stretched from what we now call Baruten local government, Kayama local government, down to this side. It became, the Yoruba settled there as a result of Oranya being allocated land or being given land to settle on by the king of Barubas. Oranya settled there, and the Barubas said, from here down, you and your people can settle there. Oranya founded Oyo Ajaka, which is otherwise called Oyo Ile, later Oyo Gboho, and so on. And from there, his descendants spread eastward and westward. That Oyo Ile, Oyo Ajaka, is north of today's Ilorin. Ilorin is not north of Oyo. Ilorin is south of Oyo. But there is Oyo today, which is south of Ilorin. The land that was given to Oranya, there he settled his people. And his descendants now spread Igboho, Saki, Kishi, Ikoyi, Ogbomosho, Oshogbo, Ilorin, down to the verge of Ife. All these you can get from the book History of the Yorubas by Reverend Samuel Johnson. That book was written as far back as 1897, but it was jinxed along the line. The manuscripts were lost repeatedly as they were in transit between Nigeria and England, where the book was to be printed. It was not published because of that until Samuel Johnson himself died out of frustration. Then his junior brother, Dr. Johnson, now started picking together pieces of manuscripts, drafts from here and there, and recompiled the book, and eventually succeeded in getting it published in 1921. So although the book was written in 1897, it was actually published in 1921. And this is the book, History of the Yorubas by Reverend Johnson. Now, this book contains in detail this story which I have told, that all the land from Oyole, which is north of present-day Ilorin, to Ilorin, to Ikoyi, to Ogbomosho, to as far as Oshogbo, was Baruba land. So the first settlers in Ilorin were actually Barubas. And the area where they were living is just adjacent to Idiakwe, where the Yorubas came later and lived with them. That place is called Baruba quarters till today. Remnants of the original settlers are still there. In the same way, the first founder of Shao, when people will say, how can you say Barubas were in Ilorin? See, well, no, even Shao here, the first settler in Shao is Baruba. If you go to Ogbomosho, if you read the book History of Ogbomosho by Faraday, it is clearly stated there that one of the first three, the trio that established or founded Ogbomoso was a Baruba person. In fact, the Shoun of Ogbomoso is paternally Baruba. Many chiefs or kings or obas in Yoruba Land, Ikoyi, Igboho, Kishi. In fact, Iba of Kishi is an abbreviation of Ibaruba of Kishi. And until today, Iba of Kishi attends the Baruba premier festival, annual festival, Gani festival or something, Gani festival in Niki, which is now in Benin Republic. So the Baruba factor in the Oyo Yoruba's history is very strong. And in fact, there have been so many researches. One of the most celebrated is the one written by Professor RCC Law. You know, people like Professor Akijogbe and all the rest of them have also done a lot of studies, you know, about the Baruba interwovenness, you know, with the Yorubas. So Ilorin is not purely a Yoruba community. It is not a purely Fulani community. It is not a purely Hausa community or any other ethnic group. It is a melting pot of so many communities. That's all I can say about Ilorin land. It's not a Yoruba land. It's originally Baruba land. But the Yorubas are here and they had some prominence. Anyway, that's a different thing altogether. They had some prominence arising from Afonja becoming Are on Kakanfo, you know. So that gave publicity to it in terms of the history of the Yorubas. Until after a while, there was change of administration and the Fulanis took over, you know. And since then till now, we have had Fulani rule in Ilorin. Okay, the occasional settlement, as I said, was on the outskirts of the city at that time. And in terms of actual location, it is between the premises of the mini campus of University of Ilorin and Mandate Market, you know. So that gives a description. But more specifically, you know, after the mini campus, you have Adewale Housing Estate. After Adewale Housing Estate, towards Mandate A Market area, that is where Okesuna was in those days. And as I said earlier on, it was peopled predominantly by Kanuris. There were also Yorubas there. And it was called Okesuna because it was an exclusively Islamic community. It was a Muslim community. And they operated the Sharia. That's why it was called Okesuna. Suna and Nabi. Okay, between Tele Suna and Nabi. That is a place where the Sharia was practiced. That's why it was called Okesuna. And Sholagberu was the leader, the community leader. He was an Islamic cleric and a great scholar. He was an Islamic preacher which had a lot of eminence in Yoruba land at that time. And because of him, a lot of Islamic or Muslim adherents came to live in Okesuna with him. He was a Kanuri person. His name was Tahir. Tahir was his name. Sheikh Tahir. He was called he was called Sholagberu because as Landa, is it Landa? Yes, Landa. As Landa put it. One of these early European put it. He was the reverence with which he was treated by his people. He was more or less treated like a king. So people now, because of the Islam, we give a lot of respect to our Islamic clerics, particularly the scholars, who is a sheikh or sheikh, So because of the way he was adored by his people, the Yorubas gave him the nickname Sholagberu, the majesty with which he comports himself, the reverence which his people gave him. He was more or less a king, and they say, okay, Oshola, that is majestically winning people to himself as slaves. They were treating him as if he was master and they were slaves. That's how the kind of respect we Muslims give to our leaders. So that's why it was called Sholagberu. Sholagberu is Yoruba language. That is true. But it is common particularly in Nigeria, that settlers get acculturated into the way of life of the hosts. So if you look at Nupe land, for instance, all the Fulanis in Nupes have become Nupes. They bear Nupe name, they speak Nupe language. If you go to the far north, you see that the Fulanis there have become Hausanized. They speak Hausa, they bear Hausa names and all that kind of thing. So the same thing also happened here. The Kanuris who came adopted the culture, the language, the names, and even the way of life generally of their host. That's why Sholagberu, a Kanuri person, was called Sholagberu. He was Kanuri, pure and simple. The Sholagberu family is still here in Ilorin. The descendants are still here. Ile Sholagberu is here. And other Kanuris who lived there before there was an internal a kind of civil strife or war that led to the destruction of Sholagberu. The Kanuris who were there are now, they moved to Ilorin. And among them, prominent among them, are the Olomodas. There's a place called Ile Olomoda in Omoda area. There is Mukada Madangba. There are also the Kanuris that moved from Okesuna. We have the Ile Onogun. We have Munabao, and so on and so forth. In fact, we have Ile Oloko Ode, Oloko Ide. When you hear Oloko Ide, it's Yoruba. But when you come to Ilorin, that's another aspect of Ilorin. People answer Akanbi, and yet they are Fulanis. Alabi Okpo, that is how the emir, the father of the present emir, the emir who died in 1992, I think. Alabi Okpo, that's his name. The present emir was originally called Kolakpo, Akolakpo. So many like that. You have an Ilorin person bearing Akanbi, and yet he's not Yoruba. You have Ilorin people bearing Akpo Okagi, that which is Yoruba, yet they are not Yorubas by origin. So in Ilorin we have so Yorubanized ourselves in terms of language that you hardly can differentiate who is Yoruba and who is not Yoruba in Ilorin. So the unifying force, apart from Yoruba as the lingua franca, we have adopted Yoruba as our lingua franca, but the unifying force is Islam. Hardly will you find somebody who is not a Muslim that is an aborigine, in quote now, of Ilorin. That is why Ilorin had this totem. Ìlú tó yìí kò léegun, ìlú tó yìí kò lóró, ẹṣin léegun wọn, ọkọ̀ lóró bẹ̀. Big as this community is, it has no idols that it is worshipping. It has no masquerades. No masquerades, no idol worshipping. Ẹṣin léegun wọn. The masquerade is the horse, because Ilorin had a very, 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 very effective and powerful cavalry that enabled it to win a lot of wars. That's a different story, you know. And the cavalry, the horsemen, had their spear. You know, in some communities, in Asian communities, they specialize in bow and arrow at war. That is why they call Timi Olofana, his own spear, arrow had a fire, attached to it. So once it is shot, you see the fire flashing as if it is lightning. Okay. In Ofa here, you have Olofamo Jo. Ofa. The founder of Ofa was very proficient in the use of bow and arrow. But in Ilorin, the cavalry, it was the spear. So the unifying force in Ilorin was and is Islam. So everything that everybody was doing before they came to Ilorin, they submerged it into Islam. That's why Ilorin is very sensitive about anything that will change its history from Iluto Yiko Legun, Iluto Yiko Loro. Now, it is not now that Ilorin will now have Oro. No. What our ancestors didn't have in Ilorin. So that's that about Sholagberu. Sholagberu was a Kanuri person, and the descendants of Sholagberu are still here in Ilorin. They can be contacted at any time. And people who lived in Okesuna with them at that time are also still in Ilorin. I've mentioned a few of them. I said earlier on that Afonja was Ààrẹ Ọ̀nà Kakanfò, and that at a point in time there was maybe misunderstanding between him and the Aláàfin of Oyo. The Aláàfin was the ruler. I said it that Kakanfò is not necessarily a ruler, but the generalissimo of the Oyo army. It is said that the Aláàfin asked him to go and attack Iwere, a town called Iwere. Iwere happens to be the maternal home of a one-time Aláàfin of Oyo, and Afonja considered that as a sacrilege, to go and attack in Oyo. It's an abomination in Oyo tradition to carry out such an attack, and he resisted it, which amounted to disobeying the Aláàfin. But from history, particularly as contained in the History of the Yorubas by Reverend Samuel Johnson, the Aláàfin himself was in fact forced into asking Afonja to go on that military expedition, because he himself was apprehensive about the possible consequence, But he had to succumb to pressure by his people and ultimately asked Afonja to go, and Afonja revolted against that because he was being asked to commit a sacrilege, and that led to the Alaafin committing suicide uh, because uh, he could not stand the revolt, so to say. And Afonja, because Afonja revolted and got away with it, some other provincial chiefs also started revolting against the Alaafin's authority. And there was an attempt by Oyo to cut Afonja to size militarily. So a military expedition was sent to Ilorin, and that expedition was led by one of the surviving children of Bashorun. His name was Ojo Isekuse, who had a Baruba mother. So when his father, the Bashorun, the notorious Bashorun, was toppled in Oyo, he survived. That is, Ojo survived, but ran to Yoruba Land. And after a while, he came back and assumed some prominence again, to the extent that he was made to lead an Oyo army that came to Ilorin to crush the rebellion by Afonja. So when Ojo was coming with the army, and Afonja felt that he would not be able to cope, he had to seek some kind of assistance. And one of those he consulted was Toyeje, who was his deputy, who was the deputy Ààrẹ Ọ̀nà Kakanfò. Toyeje at that time was the Baale of Ògbómọ̀ṣọ́. So it was Toyeje that introduced to Afonja Sheikh Alimi, who was a spiritual advisor to Toyeje. So Toyeje introduced him to Afonja that the Malam could be of great assistance spiritually. Not only that, that he also had a lot of followers, and that his followers could also help to boost the army, the troops of Afonja. So Afonja invited Alimi to come and give him this assistance, which Alimi gave. And Afonja was able to defeat that Oyo army, which was led by Ojo Isekuse. Thenceforth, Afonja tried to assert himself, or assert some kind of independence for himself, not necessarily becoming a ruler, but from the Yoruba side of the story, he aspired to become ruler. In fact, he even, according to them, even wanted to assume the position of an Alaafin, So the support which Alimi gave him emboldened him to do that. But after a while, he and Alimi's people also fell apart, and there was a civil strife which led to the death of Afonja. So Afonja was killed in that civil strife which occurred between him, or his people, and the followers of Sheikh Alimi, who were Muslim. You see, they were always, no matter how friendly infidels and Muslims pretend to be, there will always be that wedge between them. One is idol worshipper, the other one is a worshipper of Allah, So there was conflict. Conflict arose between them, which led into a military confrontation, and Afonja was killed during that confrontation. Thereafter, The Alimi people, I told you earlier on that there were 4 communities. The Yoruba, they were mainly traditionalists in terms of religion. There was Sholagberu, they were completely Muslims. There was the Fulanis, who were Muslims, and there were also the Gambari community, which is a conglomerate of different people who were also Muslims. So you can see out of the 4 original settlements in Ilorin, 3 were Islamic communities, Muslim communities. Only 1, the Afonja one, was traditional religions adherents, And in terms of population, again, the Diakpe population was the smallest, because all the Malay area came later. In fact, the Ajikobis, the Alanamus came with Sheikh Alimi. They were followers of Sheikh Alimi that came with Alimi from Yoruba land. So the majority of the people became Muslims, and so it was easy to topple, so to say, Afonja. And from then, because the traditionalists after Afonja were virtually eliminated, from the community. So it became an Islamic community under a leader. And that leader happened to be Sheikh Alimi. And in Islam we have Amirul, that is leader. Amirul Muminin, leader of the Muslims, of the believers, So from that time till now, Ilorin has remained a Muslim community led by an Amir, who originally was Sheikh Alimi, and later his children. So it has become a dynasty. So that is why I said earlier on too that Ilorin cognomen or totem was Iluto Iko Legun. There was never idol worshippers. There were never masquerades in Ilorin after the death of Afonja till today. But there are pockets, or there were pockets of traditionalists on the outskirts. For example, for a long time, until recently, Shao nearby here, they were mainly traditionalists. Before Islam, before Christianity, suppressed all those things. Here too, in the Moro area, we used to have pockets of traditionalists. But outside that, the Ilorin Emirate is almost wholly an Islamic, or became wholly an Islamic community, and has remained so since then. So the answer to the question is Afonja died in a civil strife between him and followers of Sheikh Alimi. Well, I kept saying Sheikh Alimi, that he was actually a religious advisor to Toyeje, the Baale of Ogbomoso, and he was in Yoruba Land. He was an itinerant Islamic cleric and scholar, just as Sholagberu also was. Sholagberu was a great scholar, and we traveled all over Yoruba Land. So if you go and read the book written by Professor T.G.O. Gbadamosi, The Growth of Islam, The Growth of Islam Among the Yoruba, by Professor T.G.O. Gbadamosi, he talked a lot about Sholagberu's activities and his eminence in Yoruba Land. Just as Alimi too, who came later, was prominent. Sholagberu, I said, was a Kanuri person. Sheikh Alimi was a Fulani person. And I said there was this civil strife between Sheikh Alimi's followers and Afonja's people, in which Afonja died, and his people were virtually annihilated. And since then, Sheikh Alimi's people took over the rulership of the, the, the community. So Fulani, Sheikh Alimi being a Fulani person, his rule is Fulani rule. So since then till now, Ilorin has been under Fulani rule. Yeah. Well, I said earlier on that there was a series of attack on Ilorin by the Oyo Yorubas trying to avenge the death of their leader, the Are Ona Kakanfo. Ilorin repelled them on all the occasions. The last of which was the one that was led even by the Alafin himself, and a number of Baruba kings who were in alliance with the Alafin. The leader of the Barubas was called Woru. His name was Woru, but it was popularly called Woru Kura. Kura is hyena. So Woru Kura means Woru the hyena. And he was so called because he was a glutton. As they were coming all the way, they were devouring all the goats in any village through which they passed. So that's why he was called Woru the hyena. You know, hyena's favorite food is goats, you know, and sheep's ram. Now they entered the Ilorin. There are various dates that are being quoted as the date of that war. But generally, it is accepted that it was around 1830. I'll give you the reason for that. Ilorin defeated them. The war actually entered Ilorin and got right into the city center through the Pakata gate. But they were confronted by the Ilorin cavalry or halted by the Ilorin cavalry at Ita Ogunbo, Ita Ti Ogun Ti Nbo. That's why the place is called Ita Ogunbo. And it was so called Ita Ti Ogun Ti Nbo. That was where the charms which all these people were carrying fell off them when the Ilorin cavalry confronted them. And they retreated in disarray, but were caught up with, not too far from Ita Ogunbo. That's a place called Itakudimo. Itakudimo means the arena where death caught up with them. That is the meaning. Itati Kudiwamo. Itati Oguntibo was the place where they were confronted and they were halted in the first instance. And as they were retreating in a hurry, the charms on them were falling off. That's why that place was called and still called Ita Ogunbo, Itati Ogunwoti Bo. Then where they were eventually caught up with and annihilated was called and is still called Itati Iku Diwomo. So nearly everybody in the Oyo army the Oyo Baruba army that came, that invaded the Ilorin on that occasion, were killed. It was after that war that the Ilorin now moved to Oyole and destroyed Oyole. So it was after the destruction of Oyole that the remnants, those who survived, ran away, ran for safety, and Atiba, one of the princes of Oyo, was a survivor. He now most of the chiefs that came with the Alaafin were killed during that war. So he, with the remnants of the Oyo royalty, now went to Ago. Ago, that is a village near Ago, not Ago itself, but a village near Ago Oja, was his maternal home. So he now went there and seized Ago and changed Ago to, and made Ago the new seat of the Alaafin, that is the capital of the Oyo something. So it was Atiba who now renamed Ago Oja as Ago di Oyo, and that is the first time the place was called Oyo. Otherwise, the old Oyole that was destroyed was Eyeo or Katunga, which was Baruba language, you know. So the new Oyo, which Atiba called Oyo, it was Atiba that changed the name to Oyo. Before that, there was no Oyo. And you see, when they say the old Oyo, when the old Oyo is referred to as Oyole, it means that another Oyo, if you say a place is Oyole, it means that there was another Oyo, and there was no other Oyo until after that Worukura war. So if you now go to Oyo, the new Oyo, which is Oyo Atiba, they call it, you will see Atiba Hall. And there it is written that Atiba Hall was built in 1830. So if it was built in 1830, and it was built after the destruction of Old Oyo, which they call Oyole, but which on record was Ayeo, that is what it was called, or Katunga. Now it means that that war took place either before or in 1830. And the troops, I mean the people who survived that onslaught by Ilorin also went, the Oyo people who survived also went to Ibadan and dislodged both the Ife and the Egbas from Oyo and from Ibadan. And these Oyo people, that is when they now made Oluyedu, the son of Afonja, the first leader of the present day Ibadan. They formed a trio of Oluyedu, Lakanle, and Oluyole. So Lakanle was the first deputy. Oluyole was second deputy to Oluyedu, the son of the late Afonja. They even gave him the title of Are Onakakanfo. So he was the first ruler. Afonja's son was the first ruler of present day Ibadan. What I'm trying to say is that 1830. So if you now go to Abeokuta, you also see that they say Abeokuta was established in 1830. So if it is people dislodged from Old Oyo that came to Ibadan and dislodged the Egba, and the Egba went to found Abeokuta, and Abeokuta is said to be founded in about 1830. So it means that that war must have taken place either before or in 1830, maybe early in 1830. After that, Ilorin now moved out. All along, all the 3 or 4 wars that were fought before the Worukura War and the Worukura War, Ilorin was in the defensive. But after that, Ilorin now went in the offensive. And it was in one of the encounters, one of the offensives, that they had an encounter with Oshogbo. There were 2 encounters. In the first one, Ilorin more or less met his Waterloo in that war, because it found the thing hotter than it thought it would be, you know. Then there was another encounter. So Ilorin retreated and again went on the offensive. Again, you know, conquering all the surrounding towns of Oshogbo. Then there was another direct confrontation with Oshogbo, but this time it was not a war between Ilorin and Oshogbo. No, the second war was not between Ilorin and Oshogbo. It was between Oshogbo and Ibadan Oyo alliance on the one hand against Ijesha Ekiti on the other hand. So Oshogbo asked for help from Ibadan. The Ijesha and Ekitis asked for help from Ilorin. So a contingent of Ilorin cavalry, was sent under the leadership of one of the sub-military heads. The sub-military head was Ajia Opele. Was the sub-military head, military head that led a contingent of the Ilorin cavalry to go and support the Ijesha and Ekitis that were fighting with Oshogbo. But when they got there, they were attacked. There was a kind of preemptive strike on them, maybe in the night, in the middle of the night, on the very day they arrived there. Before they settled, there was an attack, and they hurriedly retreated. Retreat is Majamosa, according to the Yorubas, only Ija, and retreating in military is a very wise wisdom, So, I'm sorry, a very wise strategy in war. You retreat. So they retreated because it was in the night, in the dark of the night. They retreated backward to, when you cross a river, you now make the river your defense. So they hurried back to cross the Otin River. Otin River is not far from Ogbomoso. From Oshogbo, and not too far from Offa. And Offa was under Ilorin as at that time. So they were retreating to a safe ground in their own territory, so that it will be daytime when they will relaunch the attack. Unfortunately, the bridge on the Otin River had been demolished. Ilorin suspected that it was sabotaged by Offa. That led to the Offa War. That's a different story altogether, So Ilorin retreated from Oshogbo on the very day they arrived there in the midnight. Unfortunately, they got drowned in the river. Because they were plunging into the river as they were retreating, the war was given the name Jalumi War. So, work on Jalumini as they were retreating in the dark of the night, But the war was not between Ilorin and Oshogbo. No, it was between Oshogbo and the Ekiti Ijesha alliance. And not the full Ilorin army that went, it was a contingent of the Ilorin army. So that was what led to the Offa War. The Ilorin army, now in full force, went to besiege Offa for that sabotage. But thereafter, Ilorin continued its offensive, because some people will say that Ibadan halted Ilorin's military advance to Yoruba Land as a result of that war. No. If you read Johnson, History of the Yorubas, it is there. If you read Ilorin Gazetteer, the Gazetteer of Ilorin province, if you read this one is Ilorin Gazetteer of 1921 by Herman Hodge. This one is Ilorin Gazetteer of 1929 by, this one is by Herman Hodge. 29 is Herman Hodge. And this one is by Elphinstone, the 1921 Gazetteer by Elphinstone. and the 1921 Gazetteer of Ilorin, as well as the history of the Yorubas by Johnson, the details of the war are clearly stated. And it was the colonial government that actually stopped Ilorin. They formed a battalion, 2 battalions. The details are in the books. I can even give you the page numbers where you can read them in this book. You know, whether it is Johnson, whether it is the Gazetteer of Ilorin of 1921 or the Gazetteer of 1929, details are there. Glover, Captain Glover, and the then governor of Lagos, Carter, were the ones that formed 2 battalions in Ibadan. The details are in these books. The detail is in Johnson. They formed 2 battalions in Ibadan. And it was the 2 battalions that was sent to go and halt the Ilorin army, you know, at the Orimope area. After halting the Ilorin army, they now arbitrarily fixed the boundary between what they call the Ilorin Emirate and the Lagos protectorate of Lagos something, whatever they call it. So that became the boundary between the north and the south. At that time, there was no north. You know, the colonial had not yet taken over Nigeria, but they had been in Lagos, and they used that opportunity. Even they had not even taken over Ibadan, they had not even taken over Abeokuta as at that time. But because the Ilorin Yoruba war was hindering the flow of commerce to and fro, you know, the coast and the hinterland. So the colonial authorities took interest and wanted to halt Ilorin, which they did. So it is not Ibadan that halted Ilorin. No, the details are here in the books. You know, it is the British that did the halting. It's in Johnson's History of the Yorubas, it's all in the Gazetteers, and it's in some other books too. You know, so the Oshogbo War of around 1896, it was 1896, was not between Ilorin and Oshogbo. It was between Oshogbo and the Ijesha/Ekiti alliance. Oshogbo sought the assistance of Ibadan. The Ijeshas sought the assistance of Ilorin, and they did not meet on the battlefield. No, there was no battle. Other than that, the very day the Ilorin army arrived there, is clearly stated, fully explained in Johnson, you know, Johnson's book. It was on that very day that they arrived there in the night that a preemptive strike was carried out, and they retreated, you know. So that was what happened in that war. The battalions which the colonial administration stationed between Oshogbo and Odo-Otin to halt the Iloris, and thereafter can be found on History of the Yorubas by Reverend Johnson. First, when the battalion was formed in Ibadan, is explained at page 644. And when the battalion was actually moved to the field and used to stop Ilorin, and giving reason that they did that in order to prevent Ilorin from continuing its advance into Yoruba land, can be found at pages 648 to 650 of the History of the Yorubas by Reverend Johnson. It can also be found in the Gazetteer of Ilorin Province by Elphinstone, which was published in 1921. So it can be found at page 19 of the 1921 Gazetteer. And it can be found at page 74 of the 1929 Gazetteer, which was authored by what's his name now? Haman Hodge. Haman Hodge was the editor of the 1929 Gazetteer of Ilorin province, while Elphinstone was the editor of the 1921 Gazetteer. So details of how the British, not Ibadan, not Ibadan at all, not Ibadan, but the British, the battalion formed by the British that was stationed in between Oshogbo and the Odo-Otin, Erimope area, to stop. Thereafter, that was between 1896 and 1897, they drove away Ilorin Ajeles, that is a prefects, which Ilorin stationed in that area. So details are there in the Gazetteer and also in Reverend Samuel Johnson, as I have stated. It was the arbitrariness with which the colonial administration fixed the boundary that led the Baloguns into revolting against the emir, because the emir, particularly Obamomo, was very conciliatory. He didn't want war. Although that's the irony of it, he himself participated in the Offa War. Maybe because he now saw the senselessness in internecine wars. So when he became emir, he was opposed to war. So they rose against him and eventually toppled him. That is another story altogether. So Balogun Gambari Adamu was also killed by the battalion during that war. During that, not war now, it's siege. They laid a siege, that is the colonial administration. After that, they now moved that battalion to Lokoja. And from Lokoja, they went and attacked Bida, captured Bida, and from Bida, they moved down here in 1897 and also subjugated Ilorin. And from that time on, Ilorin became a British, came under British colonial rule.